Okay, great. So welcome to the last session of the day. This is one I've been looking forward to. How many, well, I'm not even going to ask how many people are familiar with GDPR. That's pretty much a given. How many are scared of GDPR? Okay, yeah, probably rightfully so. It seems like some of the concern around GDPR is the deadline, which obviously has passed, where now things are, the stakes are higher. But it also seems like there's there's lots of discussion surrounding which pieces need to be implemented, to what extent. So I've heard lots and lots of business conversations and legal conversations around GDPR, but I wanted this to be a very practical, technical discussion about GDPR, as in what decisions are engineers and CTOs making today to implement their first versions of attempting to live up to this standard. Because as engineers, we have to make super practical, concrete decisions. So we're the ones that get to wrestle with the implementation of these higher level restrictions and policies. So I invited the smartest people I could find in Barcelona to talk about this. They all have leadership positions at interesting startups, all handling different kinds of data. So I'm going to turn to my left and have them introduce themselves now. Dave.
Cool, thank you very much. I'm Dave, I'm VP of Engineering at Trollberg. So before that, I've been involved in several startups as CTO in this country and outside, and I think this topic is a scary one, as you mentioned. So basically, the first time I knew about GDPR was when our CFO came to the office and said, guys, this thing is happening, we need to be careful, it's going to cost us a lot of money, we do it right, and I say, okay, apart from the fines, any idea about what is going on there? No idea, so we found ourselves the next 6 months trying to find out what it's all about. So probably today we'll be sharing a bit of our pains and experience about that, and hopefully it will be funny and constructive.
Right.
Hello everyone, I'm Alberto and I'm CTO of Buddy, which is a startup operating in the real estate field, more specifically in flat sharing, so find the perfect roommate. We are active in Spain and in other European cities such as London and Paris. I'm here to talk about GDPR because our company has been growing. We are approaching the 1 million users, and I think it will be a fun conversation.
Hello, this is Jordi Miró. I'm currently co-founder of Learning Games. Learning Games is a platform of educational games for kids between 2 and 6 years old. I'm the youngest one of them in terms of company and also the smallest one. So I'm pretty sure I went through less technical pains than them. So my view is that I do not only need to comply with GDPR, but if I want to operate in the United States, I need to comply with COPPA, which is Children's Online Protection, whatever else. But basically, it's a law that no one... So what you do normally is, since you don't want to comply with it, you don't collect data from kids. That's the safest way of saying it. So for us, GDPR was, I would say, not that complicated because we already took the decision of collecting as few data as possible. Having said so, it's the same. You get someone at the office, in our case was the marketing, so we're 12, so there are no titles. So whoever is taking care of marketing, hey guys, we're crazy, deadline is here, we don't comply with anything, we're going to jail. And then she put it, well, you two co-founders are going to jail. So if we don't solve those issues, and the first problem was, what the fuck do we need to do? Does anyone have a clear vision of really what was needed and what is needed today? Because the more I talk about it and read it, the less clear it is if we are doing things right or all the things that need to be done.
So this is interesting. So we have someone dealing with data on children, someone dealing with your passport information, Travel Perks, which was formerly Skyscanner. Can I say that out loud? Yeah. And we have someone in the middle helping match you with roommates, so someone who could hurt you in your sleep. So these are these are obviously significant, all in their own different way. So, Jordi, you mentioned that you might not have been as concerned because you already took a minimal approach to the capture of data. What were the other things that scared you guys about, like, what was the biggest initial concern when you heard about the potential limitations of your data storage, your existing data storage against the new GDPR standard? What was the biggest freak out moment?
Well, I wouldn't talk about being scared, but rather a concern in terms of time and effort. So you do have a roadmap. In a startup especially, things have to move very quickly. You have a round of investments. And in the middle of this, we get the GDPR. It is true that it has been around for a couple of years before, but nobody really understood what it meant. And this, I think, is a crucial point. So the point is that it's one of the typical laws that has been put in place. However, I don't believe they really have in the European Union a board of tech people representing a real world business case where they would say, okay, so you're telling these generic concepts. However, how does this get implemented? Do you know what are logs? You know that people store logs and they do versioning and they have backups. So these things were the things where they were concerning because there is not state of the art. Nobody really knew how to move, and even law firms didn't understand very well. They understood the law.
So law firms, it's a great business for them because they've been charging companies here and there. People who have gone to 1, 2, 3 different law firms because they were not satisfied with the answer. And even though at the last one, there's always things that you need to get to a compromise of what is needed, what can you do, and as you said, where am I in this moment of my company?
So how did you analyze your systems first? Like, what approach did you take as a leader of a technical organization? What did you look at first?
So basically it was getting the team in a room, basically analyzing all the data we were collecting, storing and sending, and making sure all the providers that were receiving data were okay, so basically they were GDPR compliant. B, as they said, we are sending the minimum amount of data needed, not any more, not any less, and that everything is designed according to the specifications, which obviously it was not. So we had to it was hard time saying, okay, you guys contact with partners, you check the contracts, you other guys, you analyze all the data models, things that we're storing, not only database, that's the easy one, but logs scattered around, backups that are here and there, and all the things that we are collecting or not collecting. And it was pretty fun time making sure everything is correct, and still you make sure everything is correct according to that, but because it's quite new, you cannot find any experts. There is always this moment of truth. I'm not sure if it's going to be okay or not okay, even if I put my best intentions and everything. So it's like you flip the switch when you you send the famous email, or you put the famous screen where you need to accept, and after that it's like fingers crossed, wish for the best. We haven't closed so far, so far so good.
And what surprised you about this data inventory that everyone has to create some kind of a data inventory, otherwise you don't know where you are, right? So I assume that was a slightly complicated process, or was it way easier than you thought it would be?
To me, it was a bit painful, mainly because of this lack of knowledge of are we doing the right thing or not. And basically, we were always designing with privacy and data protection in mind, but you never know if you are missing the last bit, especially because we are dealing with sending data to dozens of providers. So you need to make sure they're doing the right thing, because maybe you are doing the right thing, then they are not. So the weakest point of the chain is the one that matters. So it's a bit stressful, but...
Also for us, it was a pretty complicated issue. We had to check with all our providers to make sure they were compliant, third parties. And at the same time, now we adopt something which is called privacy by design. So for any new system we will design, we will not adapt it so that is GDPR compliant. We will conceive it so that is GDPR compliant. This is a lot easier. But when you don't do that, you tend to, for example, dump everything in let's say in an S3 bucket. So we needed to really have an inventory of what we're dumping and how we could manage this data. So yeah, it was pretty complicated.
I think in our case, one of the things that, as I said, COPA saved us a lot because we had already taken chances or decisions. And second, because if you've gone ever through an acquisition process, you have to go through due diligence. And if the one who's acquiring you is a public company, it's even more complicated. And fortunately, I've gone through that a couple of times. And I've always been very privacy-oriented, which when you're small, you tend to think it doesn't make sense because it puts an overhead on top of what you're doing that why should I be taking all those caution or precautions? I don't know if I'm going to be alive in 6, 10, 12 months. This is for big corporations who have security teams, who have... but what is true is that if you make this as part of your product development process, it makes it easier because you already know from the beginning which is the overhead you put into your development. While if you have to do it when you've been running your company for 6, 7, 5 years, all of a sudden you need to comply with a lot of things that whomever is acquiring you wants you to do. So it's even more complicated. So for us, I would say that we had different concerns depending who you were talking in the company. So our marketing lady, she was very worried that consent was there from our users and that every single check was wherever it was needed. But she was not that worried once those screens and those flows, she tested them and were okay. And I was saying, yeah, but you don't know what the fuck I'm doing with that behind. And so how you split that responsibility, the only way is if by a natural way you try to do it. But you have to review, as you said, everything from how you dump the data, how you treat now the data that you were processing for your development environment. There's a lot of things that you had processes in place, so at the end you have to make a list of all the things that are needed, expect that you have the resources to cover them all, and if not, this is a risk assessment. So how bad it is if I don't comply with any of it, and how can I live through that and keep working in order to get closest to the deadline as possible.
Yeah, there's no question that compliance is a big stick that can be used to wield change, but checking the boxes doesn't necessarily make your system more private or more secure,
not at all.
Right? So I assume that all of us being, again, technical people here are concerned about the actual secure implementation or meaningful implementation of these rules. I mean, I remember 20 years ago when you had to be a super advanced developer to even hash your passwords in your database. No one hashed their passwords in the database. Now that's table stakes because we have APIs and libraries and a culture and training. And so do you think is that an example of where we'll ultimately get to with the GDPR implementations? And as you're maybe not converting the brownfield use case, but you're building greenfield stuff, that will just start to get a lot better inherently and culturally about implementing these things from scratch? Is that possible? Or is it too complex for that?
Yeah, I think this falls into the concept of privacy by design, and I think that's where we are going. But maybe let's get into a practical implementation. Maybe I could share ours shortly. Basically, we do have a relational database as main database, an RDS in AWS. We are all in AWS. So we have MySQL, and then we have logs, okay? And we do need a lot of information in the logs because we are using them now, not in real time, but soon in real time, to improve our recommendation system. Basically, you are looking for a flatmate, and we recommend the most suitable flatmate for you. So what we did, so the point is, okay, for GDPR, you need to be able to delete all the user data in all your database and data storage. You have to be able to provide the user with all the data they want. And also there is this, you have to be able to, upon request from the user, to block his data from any select, insert, update, in case you need the data, maybe there is an investigation ongoing, but the user doesn't want you to use the data. That's a most complicated case for me. So practically speaking, it's not hyper complex when you are using a cloud provider like AWS to retrieve data or to even provide all the data. For example, S3 buckets you put on top of an S3 bucket. This is our, one of the examples is very common. On top of an S3 bucket, you put Athena, for example, in AWS. So you can ask for all the items, all the data points that contain a certain expression, a certain value, and then you can run some ETL processes, okay? So there is, for example, AWS Glue. So you can do this. The problem is how to scale. So ideally, do you know Google Takeout? Have you ever tried it? If you Google Google Takeout, is basically a form where you write you log in and you can retrieve all your data. So that would be ideally what everyone would need. The point is it requires a lot of effort. So now we do know we can ad hoc create scripts where we can retrieve user data, delete user data, but this is not scalable. It's okay, we have almost 1 million users, but we don't have several petabytes, right? But in future, how do we automatize them? How to automate them? And that's an issue for us. We have an idea. Maybe I will discuss later, but what about you guys? What do you do?
For us, it was a bit of a cultural change. Because before you, as Jordi mentioned, you are a startup, you need to be fast. You don't need to worry about the next 24 months, you need to worry about the next 6 months. But then you reach to a point and say, okay, don't worry about the next 6 months. If you don't comply, you won't get there. Okay, you get it serious. So it's a bit of a change. So when developers are working on something, they need to keep in mind several rules. It needs to be safe by design, so it needs to be, you cannot leak data. It needs to be fast, simple, but also it needs to contemplate this new dimension of GDPR. So it's basically about making a simple set of rules about what is compliant, what is not compliant, because usually if you check the Wikipedia, if you check what the lawyers tell you, it's like, okay, is this thing gray? Is this thing green or red? So it's basically making a set of rules that anybody can understand. So we engineers are smart people, so if you put something that can be processed logically, you will understand it. Legal language sometimes is not. So it's basically, okay, is this thing compliant or not in a way of things that I can test? And then work from there. As they say, everything that is new needs to have this mindset when it's designed and implemented. But basically, if you get to this set of rules that everybody shares and understands, it's easy to get to somewhere where you can make operative this, is it compliant or not, versus like, I will take to the lawyer and they will see. So it's not, okay, this thing is what we agree is compliant, this thing is not. So the same way you test for your feature to be working as expected to the specifications, you check is it compliant or not. So it's a bit of a change of the way how you developed.
You know, I would say, I like that question. It is, can we foresee the appearance of services, appliances, or so? I think that if you talk to security guys, they already are doing things like that. It's a matter of customizing here and there, but at the end, the problem is that the end solution that we build for ourselves is, in most cases, it's not that unique, but we tend to think it's very unique. But at the end, in software architecture, we don't invent those many things. But what is true is that you have people on top of that. And for me, that's the most, what concerns me the most. Data systems, perfect, but at the end we operate them, and we have people operating them, and we have people writing code on top of them. So, as you said, is how do you make sure that that code, that infrastructure lives by those standards? And at the end, my way of thinking is by automation. If you, the same thing that you were saying, if you write your unit test, you should have tests for a lot of those things. And then you leave like everything, which is the percentage of coverage you want to have, because 100% of coverage, it's impossible. But have you had anyone asking for the data? So I think, yeah?
Not many, but yeah, some people were like, I want that. You know, the 2-3 guys that are coming, but yeah, no, it was not super popular.
So that I think that we will get more educated into that, and we as users are going to be asking for that much more in the future. Not only us, because we are geeks I even think my wife, who is a lawyer, will tend to do that more in the future, or even my parents. But nowadays, if you compromise, as you were saying, I have a set of scripts that I run manually here and there whenever they're asked, maybe that's the right approach for this moment to go. Because if you try to over-engineer and have a perfect system, but nobody runs it because you're never asked, you're using the resources the wrong way.
That's exactly the point. I mean, for example, in terms of future, I personally would know where to go in order to implement GDPR in a safe way. I would copy Spotify. Spotify has a great post explaining how they encrypt everything in their database, and each user has one set of keys. So what does it mean? It means that if you delete the set of keys, you cannot simply access the data from this user, even in backups, in versioning. So that's a solution, but it's complicated. It's okay. So if you're a small startup and it's growing, at the moment, if you can cope with the request in a semi-automatic way, some Python scripts or something, why not? Do you have to reiterate batch processes over the night? Yes. Can you do that? Yes. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that requirement. Because the export requirement, to me, where a user can get their data, that seems to me to be require an advanced user, and it's somewhat of an advanced use case. Like, how many people have used Google Takeout? Not many. But how many people email me and say they want to be deleted from my marketing database immediately? Way more than ask for their data. So let's talk about the delete requirement, because that sends analytics teams into a frenzy. It sends DBAs or ops people, into a panic, because are these random scripts that you're running against every possible siloed data store? Or are you implementing this in an application layer logic where you have functions that are written to smartly delete data across disparate systems? Or what level have you gone to solve this problem, either in your application or in your data layer? Like, what does that look like now? You talked about scripts, Alberto. What else has been done?
So for example, we try to follow the approach of not sending data unless needed. So if we are sending data to the analytics, if it can be anonymized, because I'm not going to join by passport number or something like that, or I'm not going to group by, I don't do it. For the ones like logging, where it's just applying filters. So we have an ELK stack where we are having filters that are removing any data that is not needed. Plus, we are having some software that is running patterns to see just in case something is broken. So we try to have this double checking on everything we do. The same thing where people want to be deleted, we have also the same approach. Basically, we delete them from the database, which is basically removing anything that can trace back to the individual. Plus, our emailing system has something that, so basically we mark the user in the database and in the email system, just in case, for whatever reason, we don't delete them properly in one system, it's on the other. So we try to...
Do you allow nullable foreign keys? If a user wants to be deleted, can you retain all the other order information, or like, how do you solve that problem?
We don't have nullable foreign keys. We do anonymize the data. So maybe instead of name, surname, phone, we put some anonymous user, we put a string there, or whatever. But we keep the relations, because in our case, for example, we have chats, we have bookings. We would need to cascade, deleting cascade, which is not, doesn't make sense.
And you might have legal requirements. Like, for example, we are booking on behalf of people, so we are legally required to keep some data. So I'm not going to spam you if you want me to delete, but if you are flying tomorrow, I'm sorry, but I need to keep your data, because otherwise you're not flying. So,
or scams, if there are frauds, it happens, and we need to retain data in that case.
So that's the issue, that which data you physically delete, which data do you logically delete, and we follow something very similar, which is by anonymizing mostly everything. In our case, we don't even, so we have a dual problem, because I collect data from the parents and from the children. Because at the end, the parent is who is installing and paying for the application, and the children who is paying. And as you said, we also keep that data in order to recommend content we're showing our kids. And not only that, because I send report to the parents on top of how they are performing, and I can also compare them to people alike them. So at the end is, you need to start checking which information can I use for all that information. And in case of delete, I have not had any request for data, not even deletion. But in theory, some of the tests said that we should be capable of basically, we're going to anonymize data and live with it, and you need to keep it as long as different laws involving request you to do so.
So we want to open it up to audience questions in the next couple minutes. So be thinking about the questions you might want to ask. But before we get there, so let's talk about logging. Let's talk about logging or backups. You pick. How has your logging or backup strategy changed with this requirement?
So the thing, honestly speaking, we have a plan, but it didn't happen yet. But the point is, if we are deleting accounts, or if we are removing users, we have to keep a list of those users. So in case of disaster recovery, it can happen. It could happen that for a few minutes, because of business requirements, you restore a backup with those data. But then we will run the list again through the entire system. That's what you do. That's what, if you encrypt it, that's the idea, like Spotify does. This problem is already solved.
We do something very similar. So we're trying to keep our backup strategy is similar to what we have before, and a process that runs in theory in parallel to that restoration process, to try to remove that data that should not be available. I have concerns that for a given moment, you might end up allowing access to some data that should not be. I can live with that risk today.
Yeah, we also try to keep the backup as near to the last moment. So basically, we are built on top of AWS. We use RDS, which as most of you know, the backup and the back in time feature that they have is amazing. You can go back in time like 2 minutes before the disaster. Happened to me that I dropped a table. Actually, it was a database in production, so you need to YOLO. So basically, you go back in time and it's fine. And this thing also reduces the risk of losing this data that was anonymized. So if you are keeping the backups every month, maybe in the last month, some people wanted to be removed from the database, but if you can have this minutes resolution. But apart from that, as we also keep the request to be deleted or request to be changed in an additional database, we create send-desk tickets for that. Just in case of losing that, we will be able to recover what is missing from the delta that is missing from the last backup to the current moment in time.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing. In the end, I think, just in general, that if someone told me today they feel they're fully compliant with GDPR and they're storing logs, they're having backups, I would kind of not believe them yet. So that's why we are sharing our experience really hands-on. Like, okay, we do believe we are compliant. Lawyers don't really understand what it means. So they understand the law, but then they say, okay, adjust, mixed panel. What was mixed panel? They don't understand. So what I do believe is that GDPR now is an active law. I believe that a big company will get a huge fine soon, so that they will show that they're really gonna enforce it. And also, given the precedent, we will be able to assess what we have to do or not. So basically, what can you defend in court? We don't know yet. I mean, of course, we are trying to be compliant, but it's so generic that you could be liable for anything. That's the point. So you use the good sense, and let's see the first, there will be trials, let's see what's happening there. And I think it will be a big company, as an example, that doesn't comply.
So why do you think everyone just doesn't encrypt all the data in the database? I mean, that's a loaded question, but let's talk about it anyway.
I think that we don't do it because we didn't design it that way from the beginning. And talking about more or less mature companies, now you need to go and change first your database. Are you capable of doing that hot and not going down for a while, which your business cannot afford? Second, all the processes that you already have, from building code to deploying to backups to everything. So if you had unlimited resources, which no one has, not even Google, you might consider it. But if you have not done it that way from the beginning, I don't think you have the resources to do that, even if you would like to do it. So you live with what, at the end you're a slave of the decisions you took years ago. So some of those things, trying to do it afterwards, it's merely impossible.
But also who starts a startup, an MVP, saying, okay, I encrypt with a set of key for each one of the users, the database. You just look for your seed round, then it goes fast. You get to the Series A, then you look for a Series B. And it would be, I think it would be big design up front and maybe over architecture for a company that doesn't know where it's going in 1 month to really design a database with encryption keys, and it's complicated.
Yeah, for us, we went from, as they said, an MVP, and then we're finding, okay, things that you need to encrypt, credit cards, of course, PCI, you basically shut down the business. Same thing with passports, which has a similar sensitivity, which basically we encrypt only the passports, but all the rest, as they say, we need to be also conscious of the cost risk, so we make the risk assessment. So yeah, encrypting everything depends on the level. If you do it at database level, for example, might give you a false sense of security. Yeah, Amazon engineers won't be able to access this thing, but anybody who can query your database will. So it's about basically balancing, which is risk benefit of everything.
So you ran a risk model or a risk analysis on all the different types of data in your platform, and you decided based on that priority which to spend more time on?
Yes. You apply common sense and we say, okay, if we might be losing the pair name email, for example, that's criticality X. We might be losing credit card, that's Y, and we might be losing passport, that's it. So basically we say what is in a scope or not on a scope, because otherwise you're also adding a lot of complexity to your development, meaning you're going slow. Maybe you have the safest service in the world that nobody's using. So there's not the point for companies like ours.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a question from the audience. Anyone? We have a microphone coming.
Hi. I was wondering how you guys have dealt with so for us, data scientists love as much data as they can possibly get their hands on, how you guys have dealt with sort of GDPR in that sense and still sort of allowing them to access data in certain ways. So our solution has been essentially to sort of pseudo-anonymize anything into the data lake, as it were, and then if there is a specific requirement, sort of have a risk analysis on that and then allow sort of certain people to access to it. But it's kind of the wider thing of how do you not strangle your own data science projects. I'm just wondering what your solutions were.
That's a great question. Basically, how do you give people the tools so they can make their job without being completely open? At least in my company, what we do is whatever you require will be given to you. So basically, if you have a point where you need to access passports because you need to, I don't know, run an analysis on how the correlation between the passport number and making it up with the possibility to fly somewhere, yeah, why not? So basically, you will be put inside the scope, and then you will be part of the process. Because if you need the data, I'm not going to tell you, no, you don't need that to do your job. At the same time, you need to balance this thing with everything is open for everybody, which is not good. This is not a policy we follow. Why? Because maybe you don't need it, and it's something bad for you because you are getting an extra responsibility that you don't need. So it will be basically sitting down with you and deciding what do you need, why do you need it, because maybe you can get it from somewhere else, or maybe the data can be anonymized or pseudo-anonymized, and it would be good for you. But of course, you need to, in order to perform your job, you need to get some data. So of course, you need to get access to that.
So as a matter of course, are you pre-anonymizing and pre-aggregating more data than you used to before, just to sort of prepare for these analytics use cases, or the data being deleted out from underneath you? Has that changed the way you're planning your analytics?
In my case, of course. Before we were like happier in terms of, okay, let's send this thing to the logs just in case we need to recover it. It will be easier. Sure, it's easier. Yeah, everything is open, but then you need to face the problems of, okay, for whatever reason, somebody left this bucket open, happened to basically most of the people. So what happens now? If you leave a bucket open with data that is anonymized or pseudo-anonymized, fantastic. They will know how many trips you did per day. So you are losing business metrics. It's a problem for the company. If you lose it for a user, it's a big deal. So yeah, for us before it was like, okay, happy everybody in this world is good, and they're not going to do anything wrong with the data. The buckets can be open, but you find that the reality is not like this. So yeah.
In our case, yes, we don't pre-anonymize, but we are very careful on what we store now. Before we were like dumping everything, and it's a matter of fact we did that.
So we found out that we were throwing more trash to the logs than we wanted, while our data, let's say, our data storage in terms of databases was much more automated and anonymized than what we were doing with the logs. And one of the things we found out is we should run the same policies with one way or the other. And then the main reason was we don't have an operations team. We are 12 people and we do basically a little bit of everything. We have 2 people concentrated on data, so they did it better from the beginning. And as we were reviewing, those logs have data that should not be here.
Well, that's an unintended benefit, right? If it's helped turn your data swamp into a data lake.
For sure. I mean, it helped or it forced. And those days when you have 10 people and you have to dedicate 2 people to that rather than growing up the product, you don't feel that happy. But at the end, since we need to comply with the law, let's try to do it the best and fastest possible.
Just getting back to your question, because I think it's very relevant. The long story short, we do have 6 people in our data team, and we trust them professionally and legally. We have NDAs, so I don't see why they cannot access the data they need, so they can do that. What we don't do is providing everyone access when it's requested, and there is a reason we give access. Also, AWS is very good with roles, so we try to enforce it more and more, and that's the idea. But I don't see any issue why a data scientist cannot access everything in a database.
Great. Another question.
Hi. Could you talk a bit more about your data anonymization techniques? Because, well, with the large amount of data we collect, even just removing a name and email address might not be sufficient, and just how you go about it. Do you generate pseudo names, spoof the GPS data? I'm curious.
Well, in a nutshell, when someone wants to delete their data, in the RDS, in the relational database, we look for the user and we anonymize all the fields, basically all the attributes which are personal. How do we assess that? More or less, we know it can be email, phone. If you, for example, look at Google Analytics, okay, which is aggregated, you will say, okay, there is gender, there is age, so maybe this I can leave, okay, but we anonymize full name, surname, phone, email, and in the logs, what we are doing right now, because we don't have any infrastructure, we just delete, we just delete the log. Every instance where this user ID appears, out, so I'm sure I comply. Sure, we could run some ETL processes to just change something without deleting the log, but at the moment we do that.
Yeah, in our case, pretty much same setup. The only thing that is slightly different is that when we send the data to the logs, for example, to the case of the logs, we already don't care about anything that is personal there. Mostly we want to know person X went from A to B, so we are not storing anything that is sensitive to that person. Is XXX at Hotmail, so we are able to track by some other means that are not targeting to the person. That makes our lives easier. If we had to go through all the indexes and then find this data and then delete it, it would be, as you mentioned, pretty painful, because if we are talking about, we are still small, we are in the gigabytes, we are not still in the terabytes, but if you grow to, like the previous presentation, they were in petabytes, so that would be not very feasible. So basically what we do is not send it there if it's not needed, and then in the places where it's needed to be stored, like is the database or any data stored or things like this, having a fast way of deleting this thing. If we had to go through logs and tons of logs and delete, it's just not feasible. So you are going to end up leaking some data.
Not much to add. I think that it is pretty similar to what we do. As I said, we found out that we were not doing properly in logs, and what we do in logs is, and I have very little information about my users. I have the email of the father, the nickname that he puts to the children account, and the age. So from personal point of view, I have a very restricted data set that I need to deal with. And if I had to choose, email is my first worry, because the nickname you put to your children's account could be not even personal. So I'm more worried about the email and the age and gender than anything else. And since I have so little, I treat those four values more or less the same way.
What about third-party data sources? Is anyone dealing with significant amounts of third-party data, and have you had to jump through hoops there? You know?
I don't.
Uh-huh.
So you mean sending or receiving data from third parties?
I was thinking receiving.
Okay, no, I'm mostly sending, because actually what we do is book on behalf of people with several partners, so we send. Basically receiving is the end user, the ones is the origin of data in this case.
I mean, in case of third parties, we do send, and we try to send as less as possible. Events, for example, but they are pretty anonymized, so we are not concerned so much about that. We are, although even though we are storing in our logs more personal data, maybe than you guys. If I look for a flat in New York City, we will know the geolocation where someone looks for. That's why I delete the lines there in case it's needed. It's more complicated for us. We need to store logs with more data.
Let's take another question. Here.
Sorry, I already have my, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the question about like the system design, like I think like from what you said is like now if you already have the system that run in production, it's probably impractical to change anything now. But say that if you design system from scratch, like similar to password, like yeah, 20 years ago no one has the password, but like this day we kind of learn and adapt. Like if you design a new system today, do you have like any good practice or anything that you would do differently?
In our case, at least, what I will do different, if I can go back in time and now I had the knowledge, I will be, you will need to treat the data nature, like being able to access, change, and modify, export as features. So the same way you have a feature for looking a flight from A to B, you should be able to have a feature that is the user can export his data. And this thing is translated not only in how you implement it, this needs to be tested. So in case somebody breaks the code, you don't have, for whatever reason, a leak of data or a user not able to export. You have the POs keeping this thing in mind when they design the features. So to me, this needs to be a first-class citizen when you design the system, when you implement tests, when you monitor all these kind of things, and not just something you do because you are going to get fines. Then the reality is that we had the system that we had, so we had to basically patch this thing, you know how it is. But if I had this power of going back in time, I will treat this thing as first-class citizens since day one.
Just to add some, for example, without thinking about back in time, I think that privacy by design or designing a system or a microservice that is fully compliant with GDPR, to do so, you will need to really think about how you store data, the database, whether it is relational, non-relational. And in these regards, my own experience, my guess would be, if I had to design a microservice now, well, first of all, I would design it in a way that already conceiving all the objects, all the elements in a way that they can be retrieved very easily, like in Cascade, or with relation very clear. But what I would do would be investing in graph databases, Neo4j or AWS Neptune. I think that this could be a nice idea, okay? Because through a node, you can iterate and get to other nodes, and it would make retrieval very much easier. This would be something I would explore. And I would explore it because it's powerful, it's fast, performant, and it would fulfill the need I have of retrieving data quicker. And I wouldn't have thought of this before, so this changes the paradigm, hence why privacy by design. It would be a test I would do.
I think that I would make the whole company aware of what data means for the company and how it should be implemented. Because it's not only us who are dealing with that data. And I go back to my previous point. It's all the employees that have access to that data. And as you grow, you put more conscious, or more than conscious, you're more worried on who accesses what and when. When you're smaller, you don't care, more or less everyone has access to 100% of the data. But if you have this in mind from the beginning, is how your company should operate with that data internally and externally, because as you said, how do I send and I retrieve that information? Take an assessment, do your own assessment, where is the limit where you want to go, and from there have it as a clear rule for every development that you're doing and comply with it.
Yeah, from an economic standpoint, GDPR has definitely changed the economics surrounding not just the opportunity of the data, but the potential risk of storing it. So we finally have a flip side of the opportunity cost, right? So that's interesting to see, and I think companies and teams will have to adjust to that as well. What's the economic value and what's the downside potentially of the risk of storing this data? Another question. Christine.
Hi. So you guys are talking very specifically about, very personal data, like we're talking name, email, passport number, but you're also collecting anecdotal data about all of these people, where they travel, where they're looking for apartments, how they're interacting with your games. How do you handle this data, which could be used, even if you're scrubbing their email, that could still be used if you have enough points to identify a person as a natural human being, which is also part of GDPR compliance. How are you guys thinking about building this into your systems while still being able to give your data scientists what they need?
Hence why we are waiting for precedent and see what's going to happen. But I do think that we can work in an aggregate level more and more, so this can be done. But it's complicated. I would say that GDPR takes into account one thing which is called legitimate use, and the best interpretation of this term is that
is going to be defined by a judge.
Yes, but it's tricky. But it is my understanding that if I want to provide our users a product and I need certain data because I have alerts, so I need to store where they're looking for example, then the moment they agree to use my application, my platform, they implicitly agree to legitimate use. Where I ask for explicit agreement is marketing email, sending to third parties. This was also confirmed by our lawyer. So the legitimate use, so it's not so strict in those regards, but who knows if there was someone suing us, how we would have to explain why we really need this data. I'm sure we could win, but still it's tricky. There is not a table that explains what's legitimate or not. It depends on the product.
Yeah, I totally share, because for us, we had the same problem. It's like we went to the lawyer, say, we want to store A, B, C, D. We are going to protect this with that, this with the other thing. Is it good? And they say, okay, do you really need this data to provide the service, or are you storing it just in case to do some predictions or to sell it to somebody else? No, we need that, because if we don't know your name, where are you going from, and where do you want to stay, I cannot provide my service. I might be booking for somebody else. So for us, it's something as simple as that. But yeah, at the same time, even if there is not the typical name, passport, tuple that can identify a person, I fully agree that they need to be treated as sensitive data, because they can identify where you are, who you are. Even if it's not exactly you, they can narrow down the search to somebody who is quite specific. So we actually, even if it's not like first class, like passport thing, clearly, I agree that we should give this thing a consideration of being sensitive data, as the GPS might be not knowing who you are, but hey, this is the coordinate, there is one guy there, it's this guy.
So one of the things we did, which we had a big debate, was we are now asking our users if they want us to collect the data and use it for providing a better experience in the application, and they can opt out. Well, in fact, they have to opt in. And the main issue is I have different paths for different ages with different games and difficulties. But that changes because I know how well or bad are you playing, and I have, of course, all the data from users similar or not to you, and that helps me provide a better experience. But hey, you don't want your data to be used neither to enrich third-party kids nor even to benefit. Up to you. And that was a change for us, because in the beginning it was easier. It's all your queries and processes are built one way. Now I have to think that this piece of data that all the events and everything I'm collecting has to be marked on a way that I don't aggregate it and I don't make it go all the way through our recommendation systems. And so in generally, we don't have many users that have decided not to do it, but because it's part of what we sell as the good things we do. But we needed to do it for our users and then for our data science guys, that they need to be capable of not dealing with that.
On top of that, there is the retention period. Nobody tells you what is your retention period. So they could tell me, yeah, well, I found users find the room in an average of 48 hours, while you're storing logs for 12 months. Okay, so I argue that I need this data because we have a booking system. If there is a fraud, some credit cards allow you to dispute the charge up to 12 months after. Fair enough. Then my retention period has to be, legally speaking, 12 months at the least. This is my own assumption. We talk to our lawyers, but there is no. We feel we are compliant, and we are. I'm sure that it's not something we already did and it's done. It's a continuous process. We are learning. That's why we discuss with other colleagues and in these regards. But yeah, so it's all subject to interpretation at the end.
We have time for one more question.
So you talked about change of culture, and my question is, to what extent do you feel that there was actually a change of culture, or was it more like a moral panic that was caused by the media and the deadline of May and the very high fines? Why I'm saying that is because there is a new regulation coming up, the privacy regulation, and to what extent do you think the developers are aware of this?
Did you hear?
I didn't hear very well.
What was the last part of the question? It was hard to hear a bit.
I thought I had a loud voice. Okay, so to what extent do you feel that there has been a change of culture, or was it like a moral panic that was caused by the deadline, the fine, and the media?
Okay.
And the reason is because, I'm asking is because there is a new regulation coming up, the privacy regulation.
Okay, now I get it. I think that panic changed culture. So what you mentioned, I think is compatible. So you see a problem, you need to face it, you sink or swim. So we had to swim. And by swimming, you change your culture. You say, okay, now the rules are not the same, we change the rules, we need to operate, we're playing a different game now. So what was okay before, which is, okay, it's secure, I'm not leaking data, but okay, if the user wants his data, I don't know, I might be sharing it with third parties, I might be selling it to Booking. No, now it's different. So I think that it was the carrot and the stick. So I think they were really good applying the stick. So the first thing we knew is like the sanctions that were behind that, 4%, 20 million. This is big numbers. I say, okay, whatever is bigger, which is even more reinforcing that. So this thing makes you realize that you need to change your culture. It's like, okay, guys, now we're playing this new game that is whatever we did before plus one, and this plus one is we need to play GDPR. And I think it was led to B, because if you don't have this, let's say, and quote my words, incentives, probably the change will be organic, with some people coming and say, you know what, guys, we need to respect the user, which is pretty pretty honest thing. But this compared with, okay, these are the numbers, this is what's going to happen, is the message is much more stronger. So basically we use this like fear in a good way to basically say, okay, guys, there's no discussion about that. It's not about being good or about being honest. That is good, but it's also, if you don't get that, don't worry, you will get this number. So it was a no-brainer. You can go to any board or meeting and say, we are going to do this thing now because this is the consequence. It is like, no, but we can prioritize this feature. No feature. This is the thing we need to do or we're going to die. So this is a pretty good motivational tool. So for us, it was even a good thing because you don't need to explain anybody. So you go to the CFO, they get it, the CEO, they get it, CTO, everybody gets this thing. So it was a pretty good thing because you put everybody on the same framework and basically everybody knows 20 million. So.
Great. So guys, last question. Was anything that you just said for the last 45 minutes, could that be characterized as legal advice?
Not at all. It doesn't replace
Good.
legal counsel.
That's what I thought.
I don't know what legal means. So.
Excellent. Excellent. Great. Thank you. Let's give him a hand.